paperwork and labor laws required to have someone come into your house to help you. I'm gonna guess you didn't have enough time or enough bandwidth, and that's why you have this person coming to help you. So then to say, oh gosh, there's all these labor laws and taxes on top of it, made you groan, right? But we're going to break it down in a more human way, less paperwork way, and get through just sort of what are the requirements, what do you need to do, how do you do it as easily as possible. Oh, let's see if it's going to let me change my slides. There we go. Oh, we missed one. This can feel like a roller coaster sometimes. I know it feels a little bit like, oh, okay, that's it. Oh, no, wait, there's another law. Um, Also, I think the more that you know what's coming, the less it feels that way. So here's just a quick sort of agenda for what we're going to hit on today. Again, I know this looks like very deep subject matter, but I'll try to keep it lighthearted, fun where we can, and easy to understand. So who am I? As mentioned, I'm Rachel Lawrence. I work for a company called Homework Solutions. We've been around about 30 years. We do payroll, taxes, HR for household employers. And I can go through everything with you, teach you everything. I'm a very knowledgeable household employment payroll and tax specialist. I am not an attorney, a CPA. I don't work for any government authority like the IRS, federal government, state government, local government. So you should not take the things that I say as legal advice. You should take them as general guidance, education. We can certainly connect outside of a webinar and we can talk more personally about your situation if you'd like. So let's talk a little bit about what sort of the general, what some of the general uh, sort of how we even start this conversation, right? Biggest thing is I don't want this person to be my employee. Can't they just be kind of like an Uber driver, right? Can't they be self-employed? There are legal definitions around who an employee is. It's not just sort of how we want to categorize them. And then based on how they are categorized, the labor laws apply accordingly. So the short answer to all of this IRS nonsense on the screen is if you're controlling the work being done, things like, I need you here on this schedule, these are the things I need done, here are specifics on how I want it done, here are tools, those sort of things, you're an employer. An independent contractor or someone who's self-employed, they make a lot of the decisions and they control the employment. As an example, someone who you hire to paint your house, right? You might tell them what color you want it, but you don't tell them probably all the ins and outs, right? If it rains, they say, we're not coming. They say, we're sending Bob and Susie instead of Fred and Tim today. They say, we'll be there at this time. We will stay until this time. They're controlling the dynamic, as simple as they're going to go paint brushes up and down instead of side to side. So that's what makes them independent contractors or self-employed. So you can see that really nannies, housekeepers, home health care workers that are privately hired by you, household managers, chefs, things like that, pretty much always going to be your employees under the law. And the IRS publication 926 says, okay, if they're your employee, this is how taxes work. And we'll go through that. So like I said, we'll sort of visit that in a moment with the taxes, but one of the number one questions you all asked is, yeah, great, I'm on board or I'm not on board. Tell me why this is important. But the secondary question to that is, but my employee or my potential employee, I don't know that they're on board. They asked to be paid under the table, or I don't think they've ever been paid above board. And so I just thought I'd throw in this quick slide. This is a graphic we use a lot in our social media if you ever want to, so go grab it from there. But it's just why an employee wants to be paid legally. We'll put to the side that it's the law and there's not an option in that case, but what is the tangible benefit to that law? Things like verifiable income. They can get credit cards, home loans, car loans, qualify for their cell phone, easy access to things like workers' comp, unemployment benefits, and then, down the line, Social Security and Medicare benefits. And so that's why you'll see trending in this country, more and more household employees saying, yeah, I understand it's the law, and now I see the benefit, and so I'm on board. And oftentimes, if you have someone who is a potential employee for you, but they seem like maybe they're not on board with legal pay. Just bringing these things to light, they say, oh, yeah, I can see why that matters. So, another big thing is budgeting, right? People say, yeah, I'm on board, my employee's on board, but it seems expensive, complicated. There are reasons I don't want to do it. I like to give a little just quick snapshot here. Look at the orange. That's the majority of where you're spending your money, where you thought you would, right? Wages, benefits, overtime factored into those wages. As you can see, the employer taxes aren't a huge chunk of that. Workers' comp and other required insurances, smaller, and then having someone like Homework Solutions or another payroll and tax provider do all of the compliance stuff for you is actually the smallest piece. So let's go over what those taxes are. I mentioned this person's your household employee under the law. IRS 926 goes through and it says, okay, now that you know this person's your employee, here's how this all has to work. Those numbers in orange are sort of the important take home ones. You have payroll and tax obligations if you pay someone as little as $500 in New York because you start hitting the unemployment tax thresholds. At the federal level, anyone you're paying more than $1,000 to, and then you have the whole shebang, all of the tax obligations if you're going to pay this person $2,800 in this tax year. Each year they bump that up a little bit. So 2026 might be, 2,850 or 2,900. You'll see that number change. The other two mostly stay the same. But the important thing to think about is if you think you will pay someone this $2,800 within a year, you should start from dollar one, day one, because as soon as you cross over that $2,800 threshold, it's retroactive back to dollar one. So take a moment, scratch it out on the back of an envelope, see what you think the ballpark is, and that'll help you understand sort of what probably applies to you. And then if oopsie goops, you go over it, just know that you're going to have to sort of go back and go through the process. So let's start with what the federal obligations are, and then we'll work down from there. So a lot of us are really used to just being the employee, right? We see the employee sides of things. We see Social Security and Medicare taxes come out of our check. And so we're familiar with that. But the employer side of things looks a little different. A lot of people don't realize that that Social Security and Medicare that you're paying out of your employee check, the employer is matching it. And that's what funds the total system. Each pay half of this 15.3%. If in the household space you do not withhold the employee's half that you're entitled to withhold, then you have to pay the whole 15.3% because you're who gets this money to the government. So you can either say, okay, employee, I'm going to take your half from your pay as the law allows, and as most of us are used to in other industries. Or if you don't sort of take their half and your half and get it to the government, you're going to have to pay the whole thing and get it to the government. I hope that makes sense.
You know what?
And then,
I'm going to
uh-huh,
pop in because
yeah,
because I remember this coming up, if you pay your nanny's share of the taxes, that also becomes their taxable income, correct?
right. So let me use some just really round numbers, simple stuff. And my math is not going to be exact calculation off the top of my head, but as an example to what Susan's saying, um, if you were going to pay someone $100,000 and you are going to then not withhold their half of Social Security and Medicare, but pay it for them, their income is now their original $100,000 plus what you paid for them. So their W-2 will have a higher number. It will have 100 and, you know, I'm sorry, excuse me, $100,000 plus, around 10,000-ish dollars, slightly less than that, of additional pay. So their W-2 will look higher than what you think, gosh, that's not what I paid them. Because yes, you paying that tax for them, the government says, well, your employer gave you more money in essence. So now that's your total taxable income.
Thank you. I hear a lot of people say my nanny wants me to pay their tax share too. And quite a few people do that when they pay on the books. But then that also comes back as more money for them. So just
Yeah. So
clarification.
it's called grossing up, meaning that you are adding an amount to get to the total gross income that's taxable. Again, a payroll company, someone could give you a good estimate. For example, we do free estimates and things. Any payroll company should give you these numbers without charging you. Just draw up a little estimate for you. But if you're sort of thinking, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? That's a good way to sort of look at it. If you're just paying their FICA taxes, the Social Security, Medicare, it's significantly less of a gross up than if you are going to cover their income taxes. That is a whole nother boat. If you're going to cover their income taxes as well, you should not be shocked if this number comes back to you 40% higher, because income taxes, especially in New York City and New York State, are more expensive, right, than the rest of the country. And so I often would do a gross up for a New York employer, and they said, we're going to pay the whole 9 yards. We're going to do her income taxes too. And then I'd come back with it being 100%, like instead of that 100% of what they thought they were going to pay, now it's 140%. And that was shocking to them, especially with rates in New York City for caregiving being what they are. That's a decent bit of money. So again, before you jump into that boat, have someone do some of the work for you. We have structures that make it easy for us to run sort of a quick number. So then sort of moving on to that middle section, the other thing a lot of employers aren't aware of if they're first-time employers, because they're so used to being the employee, is they're unaware of how the unemployment system works. So it's called unemployment insurance because that's your little hint on how it works. It works much like your car insurance does or your home insurance does, right? You pay a little bit of money in, and then if there's a claim, then the insurance company pays it out, right? So everybody pays in a little, and then sometimes the claims are, paid out, and that's a large sum of money. So it works the same way for an employee and an employer. And an employer pays in a small tax. You can see it's about $42 a year for the federal tax. And then if your employee becomes unemployed and qualifies for unemployment, they go to the government and they say, I'm unemployed, and the government pays that out, not the personal employer. So it works much like insurance does. And then we'll talk about state unemployment on, I believe it's the next slide. But the final thing that we sort of already touched on is income tax withholding, right? Again, at our regular jobs as the employee, we just take this for granted, right? Your income taxes come out, your company gives them to the government on your behalf, gives you a W-2 at the end of the year, you use it to file your taxes and squares everything up. The same is true for household employers. The one oddity is that household employers are not required by law to withhold income taxes. I will caution you, however, that if you do not withhold them and your employee goes to file their income taxes, they are going to have a gargantuan tax bill that they have not paid towards throughout the year through these payroll tax withholdings. It is going to cause a little hiccup in your relationship because they likely have not been setting that money aside. We have a very complicated tax system in this country, and so most people don't even completely understand it. There will be probably some moment in this presentation where you think, I don't know what Rachel just said, because it's just very complicated. So if you choose not to withhold income taxes, excuse me, you're sort of setting your employee up for a challenging moment come spring. So I would always recommend that you do it anyway. And then you'll square all of this up with your personal income tax filing. You're the employer, so you're not paying income taxes. You're just sort of saying, I had a household employee, I paid the employer half of FICA for both halves. I paid into unemployment. Here's this form called a Schedule H government that I file with my regular 1040. 1040 is your regular personal income tax filing. It just gets kind of added in there, just like you add your W-2 and things as part of your whole tax filing. Many people use accountants, so they'll take care of sort of collecting all this stuff for you to do the filing. But that's how this is all accounted for on your income tax return.
One more question, Rachel.
Sure.
And that is, I've heard on more than one occasion, I want to pay my nanny. They don't understand it. And do you have sheets on the website that we can pop up? Like, how do you explain why your $1,000 a week nanny is only making 785? And they come to you
Mhm.
and they're like, "Why did you take so much money out?" And
Yep.
I've found that explaining these things, it's hard enough for me to understand, but explaining it to a nanny can be hard too. Do you have resources for that?
Oh, of course. So if you go to the Knowledge Center on our website, there's a tab that says resources at the top, and we have like a blog and a Knowledge Center. Think of the Knowledge Center like a library, right? And you can keyword search it. So we also then have sort of playlists, if you will, right? There are different things that say, like, if you're a household employer, here's 5 articles. If you're a household employee, here are 5 articles. We even have stuff in Spanish. We have preguntas en español, the questions answered in Spanish. And so those sort of playlists are already there. And that's a really great place to go for a caregiver or to send a caregiver that you're having trouble explaining things to. You can send them these resources. And yes, it's things like, why do I have to pay these? How does this benefit me? All of those sort of what we're doing here, but the employee side of things. Also, payroll company, and accountant, whoever's helping you with this, you need to be giving them pay stubs. That's a legal requirement. And so that at least shows the math, right? It maybe doesn't tell them all of the reasons taxes are withheld or how it benefits them, but at least you have that document for math as well, right? This much went to federal income tax, this much went to state, etc.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. And then as far as sort of saying, okay, now I understand I'm an employer under the law. I have these federal taxes that I'm required to do. There are some options there about withholding and not withholding. Okay, set. I understand now, right? On the federal level. Now we're going to add another layer. The way that it works is sort of federal law applies to all people on the land, right? And then states can add additional things on it as long as it's better for the employee, not a diminishment, right? And then localities can add too. So just so you kind of know where we're going on the next few slides, we're going to start adding those layers to the cake. So state tax requirements. Again, income taxes you can withhold or not withhold. Again, my cautionary tale there about you probably should. Um, and then states have unemployment systems too. Without getting too into the nitty gritty, I'm happy to dive deep if we need to. But basically, what happens is those unemployment taxes you're paying to the federal government sort of sit with the federal government. And then you pay these ones to the state, right? And when your employee goes to access the unemployment system, it is the state of New York that's paying them out. Well, what if like COVID happens and there's a lot of paying out from the state of New York and they run out of money? Then they go to the feds and they say, I need a loan so that I can pay out all the people in my state. And that's what that federal tax is going towards. States that do not repay that loan as quickly as possible or under the terms and conditions they borrowed it, the, the people in their state can have a slightly higher federal income tax, or I'm sorry, federal unemployment tax rate. So at the beginning of the year, you'll see where the federal government says which states do and don't have these. That's way more information than you need. But just so you kind of understand how it works. Why do I have state unemployment and federal? That's why. So at the state level, you're doing that income tax withholding for your employee. You are doing the unemployment insurance for your employee. And most people in this country pay these taxes to the federal government and state government quarterly, right? At the end of every 3 months. But New York likes to make things a little more fun. They say you can do it quarterly until you have $700 of your employees' money in your hand from their income taxes. And that feels like a lot to us. So when you get to that much, you need to hand it over nearly immediately, right? 5 days, within a week. So there's sort of this added component in New York that you can't just sort of turn it on autopilot for a quarter and do everything at the end of the quarter. You have to really keep track of things as you go. We'll revisit more of that in a minute. Let's talk about other state requirements. We've got our federal taxes, the person's our employee, we've got our federal taxes, we've got our state taxes. Well, what else is required of me? This already feels maybe like a lot, right? Well, there are other things that apply that are other insurances. They're meant to protect workers, meant to protect their employers so that you don't suffer a huge financial loss when there are things like an injury on the job, right? So again, these are to your benefit, even if sometimes they feel like this list is getting long of your obligations. So let's touch on them really quick. So the one that a lot of people hear about in New York, rightfully so, is workers' compensation insurance. It costs about what you pay an employee in a week. So, using Susan's example of someone who receives about $1,000 a week in pay, you're probably going to pay about $1,000 or so a year for a workers' comp policy. Um, Disability benefits, this is called SDI, state disability insurance. Again, this is when people go on disability, the state pays them out. So you're paying this little fee in, just like unemployment, and then the state pays them out if they receive benefits. And then one that's maybe a little more familiar to you because it's been more in the news in the last few years is paid family leave. And the state disability insurance is, I'll say, mostly funded by the employee if you choose to do it that way. An employer can choose to pay the whole thing. The paid family leave is employee funded. So yet again, another reason you really probably need help with doing these things to be compliant so that you can take these withholdings from your employees' pay. Now, the biggest question I get is who has to pay for which insurances? Again, New York likes to make it fun, although in my estimation, I guess I'll say, they do it in a very smart way. So, who needs what? Well, if you have someone working at least 20 hours a week, you just need to pay into the state disability insurance. That's like a decent full time employee. That's not sporadic, right? Same with paid family leave. And then the workers' comp, if you think about someone being on the job more hours, they're more likely to have an accident at work, right? That's just math. You're there more, there's more opportunity. So they don't require anyone under 40 hours. So a part-time employee is not required, full-time employee is, to have this workers' comp. The easiest place to get all of these is through the state. The little white underlined words at the bottom of any slide I'm on, that's a link. So this deck will go out, and that's a link to the New York State Insurance Fund and where they talk about workers' comp. The other is for state disability leave and paid family leave. So it just sort of goes over the ins and outs of this, but this is really who it applies to, right? So you have a part-timer, you need state disability and paid family leave. You have a full-timer, you need all three. Okay, everyone take a deep breath. That was a lot, right? Those were all of the taxes. I'm an employer, here's federal taxes, here's state taxes, here's how they get paid. Now let's sort of take a deep breath and switch gears. Let's talk more about what the labor laws are, okay? So we're going to put down taxes, everyone's favorite subject, and move into sort of more what you need to have in work agreements, what you need to fulfill as an employer in a sort of more human day-to-day way. So always, always, you have to pay minimum wage, okay? So for you all, that's $16.50 because the city minimum wage is higher than the state. And Susan and I were just talking before we got on the call, that's going to keep creeping up. So come January, it's going to be 17. There's this march to a higher minimum wage is what they call it on a national level. So you'll see that about every 6 months to a year, there's usually a little increase. So just keep your eye on it. Make sure you're compliant, especially if you have an employee who's working overtime hours, and so you have overtime pay, right? Um, Brings us to our next point, right? How do I know if I need to provide overtime to my employee? Well, there are rules around it. Most of us are familiar with the federal rule, which is anything over 40 hours a week is time and a half. New York said, hey, that sounds great. Let's stick with that. Some other states didn't do that. They have other rules and laws. The one thing they said is, live-ins are pretty prominent in our state. And so maybe we should have something slightly different for that. And so they did. They said anyone over 44 hours in a week gets time and a half at their live-in. So if you haven't had overtime calculated into pay up to this point, or maybe you're hiring this fall and you hadn't really given it any thought, um, going rates aren't that close to those minimum wages, right? But if someone says they want $1,000 a week for X number of hours, 45 hours, 50 hours, and you have to work back to compensate for that overtime, sometimes you do get a little closer to it. So again, a payroll company can run that kind of calculation for you for free. And you can make sure that you're doing it correctly or that you've taken it all into account because you definitely want to stay above that minimum wage. What's the Wage Theft Prevention Act? Basically, it just says you need to have some really clear contracts, right? People need to know how much they're making, how much do they make if they're making overtime, who's the agreement between, what's the schedule look like, all of those sort of just basic parameters of things you would want to know if you were starting a new job. Um, it's got a scary name, but the truth is, it just means you should write this all down. Both of you should sign it so that everybody understands what they're agreeing to in this working relationship. And then just a little caveat, New York requires weekly pay. So you want to make sure that you're paying every week, not every other week, not every month. So we know what we're paying, we know our taxes, we know we're employers. Now what? Okay, benefits, right? That's usually the next thing. When you go in for a job interview, what does it pay? What are the benefits, right? Same here. Some of them are dictated by the state and local authorities in New York. New York has more laws in this respect than most places. I think California beats you out. But other than that, they just want to make sure sort of everybody has equal footing. In my opinion, this actually makes it sort of easier because New York has already said this is what's fair. And so you can sort of run with what the state and city requirements are. And that sort of sets a norm in your market, right? You don't have these high peaks and low valleys. But there are a few laws that play in. And I promise I'll get you always to the take home message at the end. So, paid sick leave. This is a New York state law. Employees accrue 1 hour of leave for every 30 hours worked. And then the state said, well, that's sort of burdensome to small employers versus large employers. So they divided it out in that way. They said if you have 5 to 100 employees, essentially 99, that has to be paid. They said if you have fewer than 4 or fewer employees, then it can be unpaid sick leave. They have tidied this up, believe it or not, and Susan can attest. It used to be a little more complicated than this about how much revenue or income you had and things like that. So believe it or not, this is the more simplified version. And then New York City said, yeah, that's great, but in our city, this really needs to be paid. So what's the take home message? In Park Slope, the leave needs to be paid. Then we also, again, because it's been in the news, you probably actually are a little more familiar with this one. And let's see if I can get the acronym right. It's the paid prenatal personal leave, I believe, are the order of the P's there. Basically, if you are pregnant, you need to go to doctor's appointments and things like that, right? So in addition, there's another 20 hours of leave available so that you can go to prenatal appointments and all of those sort of things, right? Go pick up prescriptions, go to physical therapy, whatever it is you might need to do, okay? So 40 hours for your average employee, possibly as much as 60 if your employee is pregnant. So then let's look at another layer. New York said, okay, that's really great for most employees. But domestic workers have been a long overlooked category of worker in our country. It took over 30 years for us to get included in a lot of labor laws. We were always exempt. And so basically a lobby grew up that was pretty determined to make sure that domestic workers didn't get overlooked again. And they started at the state level. And New York was actually the first state that passed a domestic workers' bill of rights. And it guaranteed just some basic things, like a day of rest, that someone has to, every 7 days, have a day off, or overtime pay if they agree to work on that seventh day. They need to have some paid time off to use at their will. This is not sick leave, paid time off. So vacation, personal day, however you want to phrase that. And again, New York said, okay, we should probably sort of figure out this system based on how many hours they work. So you can sort of see there, if they are, high level part-time employee or full-time employee, they're going to get 3 days a year. If they're sort of a low level part-time employee, 2 days a year. If they're really, really a low level employee, and I don't mean their character or their value of work, just in number of hours, they're really only going to get 1 day. And that way they made it just sort of easy for people to understand. You didn't have to keep up with, you know, how many hours they had accumulated, right? This is just pretty simple, which is nice. And then there are also caveats to sort of basic human rights, right? There can't be harassed at work sexually, racially. They're protected from that so that there is a repercussion should those things happen. So that's a little bit of that. So if you're a park slipper and you have a full-time employee, they're going to get 40 hours of paid sick leave and they're going to get 3 days of PTO, right? So really we're almost at 2 weeks, which is sort of, I think, what people normally think of as, you know, their vacation from work and or sick leave policy from work. So again, we're not out of the realm of sort of what maybe you're used to in your job. It's just the way New York lays things out.
Before you go on,
Sure.
I do want, so, we've had 9 different surveys, and inevitably the people say I pay 52 weeks a year
Hmm.
and give 2 weeks off. So the standard in Brooklyn, Brownstone, Brooklyn, is not just your 30 hours or the 3 days after 1 year. Most nannies start with the expectation that they'll get 2 weeks paid leave and that one of those weeks will be on their own. It's like, well, I give my nanny 5 weeks off and pay her for those. Do I have to give her the week off to go to? Yes, it would be nice for them to be able to go to their family reunion. But
Right.
inevitably, people have this kind of cringe moment when they say, we have grandparents come in, we go for more vacations than 2 weeks. Do I have to pay my nanny for that time? And the answer to that, Rachel, is what?
There's a legal answer and there's a market answer. Your legal answer is you are only required to pay your employee for the hours that they work and what's called an overtime differential if it applies. That being said, that is not what the market dictates. Um, if you've done a nanny search in New York, you will probably have realized already that it's very competitive, right? So you really are probably going to have to go with what the market dictates. And the market says guaranteed hours, that's the phrase that people use in this industry, are just sort of normal in New York City, which means I guarantee you, I'm going to make something up. If it was 40 hours a week in work, is what your normal is. I guarantee you at least 40 hours a week of work or the equivalent in pay. Meaning, if I only use you for 30 hours, I will still pay you for 40. Why? Why should you bother doing that? Why does the market get to dictate that? You said cringe moment, and I get that, right? This is a lot of money. Um, what happens is it guarantees their availability, right? So that's what you're saying is you are guaranteeing me you will be available for those 40 hours every week, and I will pay you for them whether I use those hours or not, right? So that's the upside for the employer. And as far as, well, then can we sort of do what's called banking hours? Can I say, hey, you only work 30 this week. So really, I have like a credit for 10, and we'll just apply that to next week when the kids are out of school. Unfortunately, that's just not the way that it works. The way federal law dictates everything is it's in 7-day work weeks. So you can't bank hours from one week to the next. If you agree with the employee, for instance, that grandma and grandpa are coming and staying a long weekend and we do not need you Monday, but gosh, we have that event that we need to go to on Thursday. Could we move the hours within the same week? That's allowed under the law. Your employee has to be available and willing to do it. But that's really the only time that you have the ability to sort of move things around a little bit. So I get it. I'm a mom. I had a nanny until my children were a little older. It's Everyone has a budget, right? Whether you have a large budget or a small budget. And paying that money out sometimes feels like, oh gosh, that was 6 weeks this year. I get it. But the market dictates it because if you think about it from the nanny's perspective, her bills are the same, whether grandma and grandpa come to town. And to just be really frank, if she starts suffering that financially, what she'll do is spend that time that you're on vacation looking for a job that guarantees her hours. Because again, the market just supports it.
And the other thing is to not, I've heard people go, well, I'm out of town, so I found work for my nanny. Basically, to be frank, pimping out your nanny to go work for another family so you don't have to pay them, they pay them. I've seen it work, but more likely than not, it doesn't work. So if you're on this webinar looking to hire a nanny, and haven't gone through that process, what I tell people is to ask about their flexibility. So, your example of grandma's coming, we don't need you Monday, but we have this event on Thursday. Can you switch? Is that even a possibility? Is that something that the nanny could do, or do they have night classes so they can't do any date nights if you
Yeah.
wanted to switch things around? Are they open to those things? But again, within the I'm not banking hours from one week to the next, it's within the same week. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify that because people, it is easy to go, it's easy to go, but they get 8 weeks off. Well, they're available to work those other, you chose not to use them. It would be like me saying, oh, I have a staff person. Well, I don't have that much work for you this week, so I'm only going to pay you part-time instead
Right.
of full-time. So I just like to bring that up. Thank you.
Yeah. Or, hey, we're having the carpets cleaned in the office and we need all the furniture gone for 2 days so you won't be paid. That wouldn't probably strike you all that well in an office situation. And the same is true here, right? But to your point, Susan, yes, all of these things have open, honest conversations. Sit down and think about what you see in the next year about this position, and what are possibilities. And just say that. I don't know if this would happen, but one thing that's occurred to me is blah, blah, blah. And have these conversations with them, because it may be that someone says, oh, yeah, I would actually really love that time off for whatever reason. My mom lives in another state, whatever it is. Or, hey, would you be willing, no heavy cleaning or anything, but when we're gone, could you like come bring in the mail, water the plants, switch around which lights are on and off? Sometimes there's a value add there, that someone is flexible to do. I will tell you, most nannies will not come do heavy cleaning scenarios. They might be willing to switch out the kids' clothes from summer to fall wardrobe while you're gone because it's right at that change of season. Those sort of job related duties or small lifts, if you will, are usually things that you will find a lot of people saying yes, they would do. Or they'll plan the curriculum for the next 3 months for your children or whatever, right? There are lots of child related tasks. As parents, there's no end to them. So sometimes professional nannies will be flexible to spend that time almost like a teacher workday, right? So again, I promise to sort of let you take breaths every now and again. And we've talked about all of your obligations as an employer with taxes, with labor laws, what you need to build in for sick and PTO, right? Um, why? Why do you do this? Well, one, it is required of you. We'll set that to the side, the legal requirement. On a human basis, why do you do this? To protect your family, to protect yourself, to make sure that entering into this relationship and having this person come in does make your life easier, does take stress away from it, right? That's the goal in hiring someone to come into your household and help you with either some of your tasks or with your children or whatever they're there to help with, right? And if they're doing that, but at night you're laying in bed thinking, oh my gosh, what if they sued me? Or what if she falls down the stairs or whatever? Personally, that doesn't feel restful to me. So you're doing all of these things so that you can rest easy, right? You have workers' compensation insurance because if they get hurt on the job, it's not a big deal, right? New York codifies that and says you have to have it for somebody who's a full-time employee, and they will fine the daylights out of you if you don't do it. I think it was $2,000 for every 10 days you don't have it. So they do sort of have the carrot and the stick, but it lets you just have peace of mind, right? Because an employee, when they accept those workers' comp benefits, generally has to sign something that says, I will not sue you personally because the insurance company is paying me out for my medical bills and my lost wages from breaking my leg from falling down the stairs, right? If you have a lot of us have side hustles, small businesses, whatever it is, and they think, I'll hire this person as my employee of my business. If she cuts her finger off while she's making lunch for your children, your business policy, the first thing they will say is, why was your work personal assistant making lunch for your children? That sounds like a nanny. So just be careful. There's a temptation to sort of try to just streamline this some other way, but you don't need to. There are very easy ways to go about doing this the correct way and keeping them as your household employee. Employment contracts, just put the basics in there. You're fulfilling your um, requirements under the law to have a contract, but also think of it not as what's hedging you in, but as a communication document. Now everyone's on the same page. Is 4th of July a holiday that's paid or not paid in this job? If it's paid, are they getting holiday pay, like a higher rate? Just define these things out, right? Don't say you get, you know, 17 days of paid time off. Put 17 days parentheses 8 hours per day. Now everybody is very clear what that math is, right? Even if they usually work a 10-hour day, you're saying I'm only paying you for 8 if you're off because you're not working overtime. Define these things out. There are lots of sample contracts out there. We have one. Many industry resources have them, and small level providers like A to Z nanny contract, things like that. Um, Wage and hour disputes, having timesheets and pay stubs and these things prevent you from ending up in a pickle. If somebody says you didn't pay them for overtime, you could say, oh, yes, I did. Here it is. It's all right here, black and white. You got a copy of this pay stub, so did I. Misunderstanding. Rather than saying, I can't prove that I paid her overtime. Unemployment insurance, a nanny might say she wants to work off the books, and she might really mean it until the day that you get transferred for work and you're moving to wherever. She no longer has a job and she can't find one quickly, and she has to feed her own children. She is going to throw you under the bus and go file for unemployment because all of us as parents know that we will do whatever we need to do to protect our children, right? And if this person has their own children, or they have to pay their rent, even if they don't have children, or whatever it is, right? We don't want to end up in a situation where somebody has to make a rough choice. When we do things the right way and pay on the books, We don't even have to think about this stuff. Unemployment's already done by the state, right? You can go move for your new job or whatever it is. Um, and as far as how long this can catch up with you, some of these taxes don't ever expire. They can come back for many, many moons from now, when they don't get their Social Security and say, hey, I actually did work for this person. Here's all their information. So it's just not worth it. Okay, hard news over, list over. Let's talk about how you can save money on taxes, how being compliant can be helpful to you. If you offer benefits to your employee, like healthcare reimbursement, things like that, you can actually save a little bit of money because you're not taxed on those dollars. So if a nanny says, I want $100,000 a year, or $50,000 a year, or whatever it is, you can say, okay, but let's make part of that a healthcare reimbursement. So we're only taxed on the wages and not on the healthcare reimbursement. It's very easy to do this. It's a very low bar of entry. The employee goes and gets their own health insurance, essentially brings you proof of receipt, and you reimburse, right? Just like you would if they went to get diapers at Target. There are options here. I think the QSARA, the Qualified Small Employer Health Reimbursement, is what most people go with in this space. There is another one called an independent coverage health reimbursement arrangement. Um, I see less people do that just because there's no reason most household employers want to go above this $6,350 or $12,800 limit, and really that's the only reason you do the ICRA. Again, these links at the bottom, a little more information on those. And here's just a quick sample. I won't hover on this since I'm sending the slides, but take home message. If you offer these to a single person, the employee's saving probably $1,000 in taxes a year. You're saving close to 500, right? So there's a savings there. What about other ways to save money on taxes? You can claim a child independent care tax credit. If this child care is so that you and your spouse, or you, if you're a single parent, can go to work. Basically, the government says, hey, if you have to use childcare so that you can work, we'll help a little bit. It's a sliding scale based on income and the number of children you have, and then you can recoup part of the cost. A dependent care FSA you might have through your own employer, or a spouse might have it through their employer. You essentially say, hey, my employer, take some of my money and put it over in this other bucket before you pay me and before taxes are applied. And so you're not being taxed on that money because it's already been removed, right? And so, forgive me, there's a gnat in front of me. And so it's sitting over there in this bucket, and then you reimburse yourself from it. So it's essentially avoiding the taxes on it. You can reimburse your nannies for their student loans, for tuition, for educational programs where they go learn how to work with your child's age group, etc. Those are non-taxed compensation dollars. Same for part of their cell phone, public transit, for parking. Most of these are annual limits, but just a little note that those public transit and parking are per month. Again, more information on these at the bottom of the screen. And you've made it. You know everything there is to know about being a household employer in New York. You have my slides. You have the resources at the bottom of them. You have these resources that are sort of general topics of conversation, like a New York State tip sheet has all of this together in one place. All of these are free resources on our website, so you don't have to have taken good notes or retain everything that we just talked about. All of this information is always free to you. We have thousands of articles. Again, you can keyword search them. And of course, last but not least, if you just think to yourself, no thanks. I don't care what the rules are. I will comply, but I do not want to do the ins and outs of it. Payroll companies like ours can take care of those for you. Mobile app, things are easy. Plans and pricing link there. And then if you say, hey, I kind of want to see what it looks like before I buy, check out our YouTube. There's a whole bunch of like how to use our system things on there that'll show you how easy it is.
Thank you. If
Thank
I
you.
had one thing to say to people is if you're going to pay on the books, which you should do, it is peace of mind, get a service to do it for you.
Yes, I
It's
agree. I am
super.
also a client.
Yes.
Or
Well,
was when I had my nanny.
so let me ask you this. Where, because I remember somebody, there are a couple of things that a payroll service can't do for you. And what are those?
Yes, so only an insurance broker or the state of New York, the New York State Insurance Fund, can sell you the insurances. So we do purposely do not have an insurance broker. We want you to believe us when you tell us that you need to, that didn't work out. We want you to believe us when we tell you you need these, not that it's an upsell. So we purposely don't sell them. You can go get them from the state of New York. You can get them through an insurance broker, but to be honest, the state of New York purposely tries to sort of funnel you towards them by making them the easier solution. So that is something that you should do on your own, if you will. But like our New York State tip sheet has a link straight to the New York State Insurance Fund. It's really easy. I can't do it because I'm not a New York resident, but the last person I talked to said it took them about between 5 and 10 minutes to get a quote. So super fast.
Yeah, I mean it is really super complex, and so I do. I mean, one of the things that happened in COVID is people were continuing to pay their nannies who weren't working because they didn't want them to file for unemployment because they were paid off the books. Can you talk a little bit, just a little bit about like how that turned out for people? Because some people are like, well, I paid them X amount of money, but then I didn't have to go back and pay because you have to go back and pay all the back taxes. How did that work?
Yeah, so let's go back to March of 2020 when all of us were like, it's going to be 10 days. It's going to, no big deal, right? We're at 2 weeks, we're all going to be back at work. Fast forward to now, we obviously know that is not how that played out. So I totally see why that was a solid plan when you thought it was 10 days, right? You're like, ooh, I guess we should have done this on the books, but gosh, we already didn't. What do we do now? I love my nanny. I want to take care of her, or I don't want her to go file for unemployment, or the unemployment lines are down the street, right? I get all of that. Some people did. They did it for a very long time. Um, and probably to this day, those wages have never been on the books. I can't really condone it because of what I do, but I get that it served the purpose at the time for probably both parties, right? Let's say you went the 10 days and then you said, this is not looking like it's going to let up. It's getting worse. And you said, okay, we made a mistake. We should have done this on the books. I didn't know. I didn't see the value, whatever it was. You can always go back and do it. You can always get on the books. Couple of things in New York. You can't get workers' comp if you weren't paying on the books because you have to prove you were paying legally. That's the biggest possible fine. So you need to, as soon as you decide to get this on the books, write a very nice letter to the New York State Board and say, I am ever so sorry. I did not realize I needed to do this. I have since become educated. So sorry. We have on the books payments now. We had Homework Solutions or some other company clean this up for us. We have workers' comp and all the other insurances now. I will never ever do this again if you will waive that fee. Mostly I see them say, okay, but they will nail you if you do it again.
So, with that in mind, and that's what I've seen over the years. I mean, I've heard a lot of things happening. I've heard a lot of people who say, my nanny was very vehement about not paying on the books. I had to let them go, and I get something in the mail that says, oh, you owe all of this. The other thing is people who pay part on the books and part off the books. What I have heard is that it's very hard to get things waived when you partially paid correctly and partially paid under the table.
Correct.
What have you seen?
You've basically done all the work without any of the reward, right? You have no protection. You've gone through all the steps of putting things in the books, but you didn't do it all the way. So you don't have the protection of actually being on the books legally. And to your point, Susan, you've basically said to the state, I knew better and I chose differently. And so now you don't even have plausible deniability. That being said, it's August. Let's say you have not done this up to this point. One, let's clean it up now. Two, if you say, for whatever reason, I cannot go back and clean this up when we know better, do better. I cannot condone not cleaning it up. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying you know better from 1 o'clock today on. Do better from now on. With a nanny hire, you might be switching nannies this month because you're going to a part-time employee now that your kids are in school full-time. Do better now that you know. I get
Yeah,
it. They don't teach this stuff in high school, right? There are people on this call that are probably going, oh golly.
yeah.
So
I mean,
do better now.
one of the issues is, well, for me to get blank service, Medicare, Medicaid, I get those mixed up. So I can't work more than blank on the books.
Mhm.
So now you're doing basically Medicare fraud and coupled with, which can come back to bite the nanny as well as the employer, correct?
Correct. So fraud is fraud. And the way I look at it, again, we'll stick with the parents of children theme here, that because that's who we all are. My children make decisions I can understand. I understand why one of my twins hit the other one. They got frustrated. I get the feeling, but I want to help them make better choices, right? As their mom, I want to say I can understand why you want that, but it's not the right thing to do. And as an employer, you're not their parent, but you are a member of their grouping, right? And you have the opportunity to say, I get it, but I can't help you do this the wrong way. So let's figure out a way where we give you a whole bunch of money in that individual healthcare reimbursement so that you're at the right levels you need to be. That's totally legal. Or maybe this isn't the right job for you, right? Um, because I don't want to go along with this and harm you and harm myself.
I mean, that's one of the things that I hear the most is I want to pay a nanny on the books. I can't find somebody willing to be paid on the books. And that ends up becoming a problem because so many people don't. We need, and I remember talking to Catherine Webb,
Oh yeah, Kathy.
Kathy, and she said if you look in DC, the percentage of people who pay on the books that work for the government in DC is astronomically high compared to Brooklyn and New York City, because
Oh
they,
sure, I
because
agree.
you wanna be a some uppity up someday in the government, you need to be able to have a paper trail that you did everything right. And you'll see every once in a while, oh, they didn't pay their nanny on the books. So if you want to run for office someday, make sure to pay on the books.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I will say that same is true of any professional licensure. If you're an attorney, if you're a doctor, if you're a financial professional, part of your license says that you agree to live by the laws of the federal government and in some cases state. And so you put your license at risk. So it's really just not worth it.
yeah. So, the top piece of top piece of advice before we close for people paying on the books, mine is have a service do it. Um, Mine is to make sure to have a service and explain very fully to your nanny how things come out. Because like I said, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, I've literally heard my employer is stealing from me because of how much they take out. So if they don't understand it, then they're not going to understand why the nanny on the bench next to them at the playground is making $200 more a week because
Water cooler talk and park bench talk are horrible places to get tax advice. And I tell people that all the time. But yes, I will do one better. Again, we do free consultations for families. We also do them for nannies. Like we are a huge sponsor of Nanny Palooza. We will talk to people and give information all day long. We will run payroll calculations all day long because we truly believe that people, when they know better, do better. And they can't do that if they don't have the information. And so if you're hiring someone and they say, I mean, I get what you're saying, or I don't get what you're saying, but I don't see the value for me, or whatever the pushback might be, they can set up a free consultation with Franny and she will walk them through it. Fun fact, Franny was a nanny for a long time. I was a nanny for a long time. Many of us get it. And so we can sometimes have a connection to these people and say, yeah, no, I didn't know either when I started out. Let me explain what I see the value in it. And we don't have a horse in the race, right? It's different than an employer spelling it out. Sometimes it just feels different. So, yeah, there we have lots of resources. We'll talk to them all day long. We're happy to help in any way we can.
okay, I'm going to pause the recording because I have a question for you that I don't want to be on the recording. Ooh, people are going to go, wow, what was